Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge cycling podcast with Benji Naesen for our Gent Wevelgem men and women's and Catalonia Stage 7, the final stage recap. It's going to be in one beast of a podcast, 3 separate YouTube videos. You know, that's how it works. Big shout out to our show partner, Lacole. Lacole love the classics and so much that they're sponsoring, or they're named title sponsor, in fact, of one of the teams competing in Gent Wevelgem today, Drops Lacole in the women's race. If you want to go and check out Drops Lacole and Lacole, then they're doing an Instagram takeover on Lacole's Instagram, which is Lacole UK. Pretty obvious which one it is. It's blue tick verified. And if you go into the Insta stories, you got the behind the scenes of the Lacole race day at Gent Wevelgem, which is happening as we record, because the live coverage of the women's doesn't start for a while. But yeah, go and check that out on the Lacole Insta. But Benji's banned me from telling you the Gent Wevelgem profile. We'll do that race first. Apparently he has to do it because my pronunciation's not good enough.
Yes, I'm going to be taking this one over. 247 kilometers, and what's special about Gent Wevelgem is that it's kind of divided into 3 aspects of the race. The first 140 kilometers are relatively flat, but in this area we go through the mood, and we spoke about it in the Brugge de Panne recap we did. It's a section that always allows for a bit of crosswinds if the wind is well placed, and today it was extremely well placed. It was kind of placed in a similar fashion as the Gent Wevelgem of 2015 at the start of today's race, so that was looking good. I was looking forward to it. After that section of pure flatness with potential crosswinds, we've got the hill section, the bergs, and that's also kind of split in 2 parts, from like a good 100 kilometers to go to like 70 kilometers to go. There's 5 bergs, including the Scherpenberg, Fidenjeberg, Baneberg, Kemmelberg, and Monteberg, just before that Kemmelberg. Then a bit of a transitioning section in between of like a good 10 to 15 to 20 kilometers that leads back into the bergs, back with the Monteberg and Kemmelberg, so second time Kemmelberg right here. Then we've got the Scherpenberg, Fidenjeberg, Baneberg, and eventually the final climb, which is again the Kemmelberg. This would be usually a deciding moment for a group. Would they stay away or would they not stay away? Because that leads into the final 25 to 30 kilometers, which is relatively flat, going to the finish line. Now, what usually happens in Gent Wevelgem is that a group forms either in the bergs or before the bergs in these crosswinds, and then eventually you've got a battle between the peloton and the group that gets away on the flat section afterwards to see if a sprint comes out or the front group ends up taking it in a bit of a skirmish. Today I was, well, pretty similar, but we'll go into it in a second. I think that there's one change I need to address beforehand. There was a fire at the finish line. I think a few kilometers from the finish line, a recycling factory that was on fire, and fire was so extreme that they had to change the last 5 kilometers of the stage. Not really that intricate, but it did kind of change the aspect of the final 5 kilometers. Usually you've got a visit through Menen, which is a city near the finish line, and this allows for a lot of cornering and allows for a late attacker to potentially get more advantage out of it. Today, that changed, and they had to take a whole way around the fire and leading back into the final 3 kilometers of the actual original profile.
Same finish. So.
This, same finish. But this changed because, well, it's a wider road, and they had a bit of headwind in that, turn they have to do that they didn't have to do originally. So that is a bit of a disadvantage this time around towards riders that attack in the final 5 kilometers. But it opened up like crazy, didn't it?
Well, before people getting dropped before Benji, Bora Hansgrohe not permitted to start by the race doctor, despite much to the UCI commissaires or Bora Hansgrohe's protestations. They had a close contact, so COVID ruled them out. Not sure if they have any actual positives. Trek Segafredo also couldn't start, which is a shame. They got last year's winner, Mads Pedersen, some crosswind animals in that team. Real shame. So Trek and Bora out, and I really wanted to see how Pollitt would have gone today, Benji, too. And I think that really changed the race. Those 2 teams, probably 2 of the top 5 strongest teams being out. But unfortunately, the most exciting part of the race, at least in Benji, in my view, didn't get televised. Maybe I'll have it on the highlights tomorrow, but there was crosswind chaos. Not even overusing that word. Apparently, with like over 100 Ks to go, more than that, there was a group of 20 plus riders, and we're just going off like live tickers. I think Lanterne Rouge are listening to the race radio or something, trying to figure out what's going on. And no quick-step riders had made that front group, but favourites Van Aert, Bennett,
Well,
Matthews.
that was quick-step rider, but
Bennett. Sorry, only one quick-step rider had made it into the front group. Quickmen, Trentin, Nizzolo, Van Poppel, Dupont, as well as a couple of bike exchange riders helping Matthews, maybe more than a couple of Mezgets, Bauer, and I might be missing Stannard too. So that was really surprising, and that pretty much stayed the whole way. You can see some footage of the Vias. Renard put up on Twitter some pretty sick footage, it must be said, from behind when the crosswinds were going hard, and it pretty much stayed that way. Did it re-split again, Benji, or was it just attrition from that point?
It was a bit of a war of attrition on multiple fronts, because you have that initial split of those 21 riders initially that got away in the peloton. I think still like 170k to go, like you mentioned, like away from the finish line, in the movement
world
section.
Champs.
Yes, exactly. And what happened afterwards is that the second peloton, who was split in that initial split, then came together. We saw the entire part from the moment that they left this Demuden section, so the marches we spoke about again, to relatively a good 40 kilometers before they start the hill section. That was an entire chasing scene behind, because that peloton was trying to catch those 21 riders that was ahead. Obviously, you had a small break in a way that was ahead as well, but didn't really come into play today, so it's not too much worthy to put attention into that. But it split again, and that was like in the last 30 kilometers before the Bergs, where the peloton behind started splitting again and splintering all over in another crosswind section. And I think what ruined the entire chains from that point is that every single time that there was some cooperation in that second peloton group, something would happen that caused it to splinter again. The crosswinds, twice, and then eventually when they started going to the Bergs, which, was a pretty special move, I think, that we can mention, is an attack by two quick-step riders to try and basically make a move from the peloton, who was already kind of splintered on the first Kemmelberg, to the front group. And it was a bit special, because usually we don't see the Koenig being the team that has to make something happen because they missed out on something. And today that was it completely from start to finish. They had to do it the first time on the Kemmelberg with those two riders. I think it was Stibar and was it Lampard? I'm not actually sure. Ballerini, yes,
let's try and define the race situation, because this is about the time live coverage started, so we can speak with a bit more confidence about it. The gap between let's just say group one with the favourites back to the group led by Quick-Step was between 50 seconds and a minute 20 for a lot of that period of time. We still have about 100 kilometres remaining. De Koenig chasing because they are not happy with having Sam Bennett in this group. And I'll read out all the names just for completeness, because that will make you surprised that only Bennett made it into this group. Bauer, Bennett, Bissiger, Bistrom, Colbrelli, De Boist, Dupont, Erviti, Fedorov, Golash, Kung, Lecroc, Lemois, Maas, Matthews, Mezgec, Nizzolo, Rex, Ruch, Stannard, Sutherland, Trentin, Van Aert, Van Hooijdonk, and Van Poppel. One quick-step rider in that group, they're sprinter isolated. That's why when they hit the Hellingen, and I think it was the Bahnenberg, we saw the quick-step. I thought panicking. As Benji mentioned, it was Stibar trying to bridge with Ballerini. I think they had Naesen and Greg Van Avermaet behind, Fage des Citroën. Maybe there just wasn't much coordination. Maybe bike exchange riders are doing a good job blocking, but that 50-second plus gap to a front group that was working really well. I was like, oh, that's a big gap to try and bridge, especially when Durbridge joined them from Bike Exchange sitting on. And they got on to the Kemmelberg the first time, as Benji said, and Stibar dropped Ballerini. So I don't know whether that move was to bring Ballerini with him or Ballerini was to try and help Stibar bridge across. A little bit confusing and a little bit of panic for the Koenig Quick-Step. They then went on to the plug streaks, 55-second gap, 72 Ks to go. De Koenig was still behind. What are the plug streets, Benji?
So basically, this is in a region where, World War was held, the first one. And this is usually called Plugsteert, these streets and this area. And these are gravel sections. And one of them is, for example, the Hill 63 gravel section, very known hill from World War. I think it's the first one. Let's hope I'm not saying this wrong, because that's pretty harsh if I don't know that correctly as a Flemish person. But I think that they're basically just some glorified gravel sections. And it's not that they're going to make the biggest difference in this, but we do know from history that a lot of riders do tend to have punctures on these, like Christoph today again on the same flat street that he had a puncture as well a few years ago. Mezgec, indeed, he dropped out of the front group, am I right?
Yes, Mezgec punctured, so Bike Exchange were down an extra rider. They still had Bauer with Matthews and Stannard, I think. And there's no real moves to describe from Stibar with Ballerini. I mean, then De Koenig tried again with Lampard multiple times. Lampard was either trying to bridge across in a smaller group of maybe 3 or 4, or he was just straight up towing that, let's call it, Group 2 on the road. And there was attrition out of that first group of 20 riders. You might have noticed in the names I read out a pretty big divergence in ability. That's because some of the riders have been mopped up from the break. That's because maybe they were just in the right place at the right time when the echelons first happened in the race. So Jonas Rutsch was dropping eventually, Rex dropping, Mas Lemoine, Golas, and most of that dropping, or the next big separation, was on the second ascent of the Kemmelberg with, I think, about 50 Ks to go, or just over. Wout van Aert, I wouldn't say it wasn't a massive attack, and it wasn't because he didn't have the legs. I think he was just trying to resplit it once again, and it was a nice move from Van Aert, and he created a 10-man group, dropping about half of that other group, who became now Group 2 on the road, immediately over 20 seconds behind them. And then you've still got De Koenig chasing now in Group 3. The front group of 10 riders with Van Aert was Bennett, still made it over the second ascent of the Kemmelberg, Van Poppel, Vintermarché, Van Aert, Van Hooijdonk. Van Hooijdonk moved from CCC to Jumbo-Visma this year, Colbrelli, Matthews, Stannard, Nizzolo, Trentin, and Kung. You'll notice about the composition of that group, pretty much all of them are sprinters, be it a bunch sprinter, combination sprinter, or like a classics sprinter like Trentin. All of them are sort of the guys who they back their sprint in a reduced bunch, except for Kung and Hooijdonk and Stannard were working for their leaders. So yeah, at that point, Benji, did you think Quick-Step or the other Group 2 had any chance of catching that group? And if not, why not? Why would that group work together so well for the rest of the race?
I think there's multiple factors that led into the thought process that I had at that moment. First of all, the front group has basically sprinters plus Kung and Van Hooijdonk. This means that, those sprinters are likely going to work together because they all want to kind of bring it towards a finishing sprint. Van Hooijdonk is not going to splinter it himself. He's going to try and keep it together because the more people they have, the more they can, try and get away from the people behind. That's also one of the reasons where I think Wout van Aert wasn't going to really explode anything on either of these clans, because the more people he has at that moment, the better the situation is for the Postberg section. And I think that is one of the factors, just the fact that sprinters are there, they're going to try and work together. Kung is the only person that will be the dude that will try to attack at some point, but not expecting that on hills itself. And then the group behind is basically a group that has been cracking and splintering every single crosswind, every single hill, but also the factor that the Koenig, despite their moves, every time the move failed, they weren't pacing again.
It'd been like 100 Ks of them trying to get more riders into the front group because they knew with the last descent of the Kemmelberg and Bennett with no teammates, that's not the ideal situation for them. They want Stibar, Lampard up there. But as Benji said, they'd eat in 20 seconds and then just hold that gap because the front group, at no point did this front group ever stop cooperating. Pretty much all the way through to the finish. There was no finessing, everyone looking around because of the composition of that group. And the second group, riders who'd been dropped because they didn't have the legs, they were never coming back. So 38 Ks to go, 45 seconds from that group of 10, mostly sprinters with the race favourite Van Aert, back to group 2, and then more back to the De Koning Quickstep, Naesen, Van Avermaet group, probably over a minute at that point. 3 Ks to go into the Kemmelberg. They line up. Trentin accelerates at the bottom, and we'll talk about Trentin, I think, afterwards. Van Aert then counterattacks over him, but not a full, like, him and MVDP going head-to-head attack on this last climb. It's more just an acceleration. Bennett started dropping, but not completely distanced. Him and Colbrelli were kind of fighting to get onto Wout van Aert's wheel. Van Hooijdonk was just distanced over the top. De Koning, they attacked on the Kemmelberg in that third group, and they were at a minute still at that point. Sam Bennett, whilst he made it over with that group, they had 33 Ks of flat road to go, 48-second gap, and he started vomiting on the right-hand side of the road, like a lot of liquids. So, maybe he had minus 0.0% in the bid on accidentally or what happened. But obviously that big effort cost him and he wasn't feeling too good. And I mean, there's really not much more to say for the next 15 kilometres. There's just these failed attempts from behind with Lampard, Van Avermaet, Naesen, Bistrom, Van Baarle, Vermeersch, Lecroc and Lemoine getting from like a minute 10 to 55 seconds, working together for a bit, and then it just all falls apart. Lampard gets mad, justifiably probably, and it goes nowhere. And eventually people would just start attacking out of that second group. 25 Ks to go, 53 seconds, still no change to the situation. Everyone's rolling turns on the front. 15 Ks to go. Wout van Aert rolls his turn, Van Hooijdonk rolls over him, and then Van Aert loses his wheel. Van Hooijdonk looks under his left shoulder, doesn't get out of the saddle, and then changes up a gear, accelerates really hard in the saddle, almost imperceptibly, drops Bennett and Van Poppel on this flat section. Matthews just hangs on, and then we have 10 Ks to go. Reminder of the group: Colbrelli, Wout van Aert, Trentin, Matthews, Kung, Van Hooijdonk, and Nizzolo. So we still have some genuinely quick men, Nizzolo, in this group. Remember, he mugged Bora Hansgrohe and Ackermann in Paris Stage 2 crosswind reduced by sprint in 2020. Turgis attacked from the back group, but they were irrelevant. The gap was too big. A minute with under 10 Ks to go. What happened in the last sort of 9 Ks, Benji, and what should riders have done differently?
I think it's a very difficult situation for everybody involved, but I think everybody was waiting for one rider in that front group to make a move. And that's Stefan Kung. He's the only rider that does not have a confidence at all in his sprint because he can't sprint. And the others have some confidence in their sprint. They're not all equal at sprinting, that's for sure. But Stefan Kung is definitely the rider that everyone was expecting to attack. And I'm afraid that the other riders knew that as well, because he obviously was in typical echelon formation, just like everybody in that group, just taking his turn the entire circle around, loop by loop by loop. And they go into the section where that is not the original parkour. So for like 3 kilometers, they go onto a wider road with a bit of a headwind. And then the issue is that it's harder to get away from that group. It's not an ideal section to attack. So that's also not benefiting anyone in that group to make that move. And we noticed at a certain point that I think it was with, 4 kilometers to go or something, 4.5 kilometers to go, where Kung was trying to put himself at the back, and then he got moved into having to do the loop again, and he tried very fast to do that loop. So it was so like phoned in that he was going to try something, because not a single one had taken that entire relay turn so quickly. Then Kung at that very second. So Kung took that loop and was trying to get to the back as fast as possible, because you can't attack from a position that is ahead of people because everybody will see it. So he was trying to get to the back, but one man was ready, and that was Nizzolo. Nizzolo was like, no, you're not getting behind me anymore. I'm going to sit in your wheel. And Kung was like, oh shit, now I've got a problem. But he still tried. He still attempted his attack at that moment, which, I don't think you can really blame him. I don't think there's much else you can do as Kung in this situation.
He had to try.
Yeah, he had to try something, and he tried to attack on the left, Nizzolo directly on his wheel. He knew it was coming, and he was there. Matches in the wheel of Nizzolo. The rest was kind of ready because it wasn't really the most powerful attack. And then one of the riders at the front moved to the left, which kind of ruined the entire attack by Kung. And then it was like, should I try again? I'm like, past everybody now. But then he was like, okay, I'll just sit in the second wheel because this ain't going nowhere. And this leads into the last 2 kilometers with just Nathan van Hooijdonk moving to the front and basically bringing Wout van Aert on a throne to the finish line, because, bringing all the sprinters on a throne to the finish line then. And nobody else really made a move anymore. Do you think that anybody else should have tried before we went to the final sprint?
Trentin, maybe. But, I mean, what can you do? You might be costing yourself a top 3, most likely, by doing that. And that's pretty much what happened with Kung. Van Hooijdonk, unbelievable today. Closing down Kung before Kung had even got past his back wheel. Shut that down ASAP. Really, really strong. I thought they might have attacked with him because he looked so good and maybe to force the other sprinters to close, but they backed Wout van Aert for the sprint 100%. Van Hooijdonk leading them out into the last 500 metres, this group of Colbrelli, Trentin, Matthews, Nizzolo, and Van Aert. Kung was second wheel. He just did a lead out just because, I guess, into the last 250. Then Wout van Aert kicked off his wheel, third wheel, straight through the middle, gapped everybody, immediately put a big gap into them, and I mean, it was a very, very easy sprint victory for Van Aert. He posted up with like 25 meters to go. Van Hooijdonk was celebrating behind him with 25 to go, Ks to go as 25 Ks. Yeah, probably there were as well, but 25 meters to go. Nizzolo was coming round, but he was started too far back. He came second, 3 Italians after Van Aert. So Van Aert, Nizzolo, Trentin third, Colbrelli fourth, Matthews fifth, Kung sixth, and Van Hooijdonk seventh. Matthews seemed to be having issues with cramps or something. We thought he might have been playing, but maybe it was legitimate in the last 5Ks. Then I'm looking at who came out of the second group. I know Terzius attacked Benji, so I think it was Van Baarle, Terzius, and Gianni Vermeersch 8, 9, 10, and then not sure of the results after that. No quick-step riders in the top 10 of Gent Wevelgem Benji. After E3 Harelbeke dominance, some people won't be getting their soup from Patrick Lefebvre this evening.
Yeah, but I think that it all comes down to one split second, the second that the initial echelon got formed with Wout van Aert in it. And I think that is the only moment in this entire race where they can really blame themselves, because afterwards they had to run behind everything that was happening. They had to try and fix what they lost with that initial move, and they couldn't do it, which means that the initial crosswind devastated their race, and that
no one really wanted to help.
The funniest part I find Ineos, because, they made the initial echelon, and there was one rider in it, Mikel Golas,
Yeah, I
So
know.
I don't know
They
what their
they
plan
didn't get
was, but
Van
I think it
Baarle
didn't
in it.
work.
I know.
Yeah,
They're like, we're just gonna just blow this race apart and then not get Van Baarle in the front group. And Goldust got dropped on the Wout van Aert acceleration on the second Kemmelberg. Van Hooydonk, Benji. We spoke on the Jumbo-Visma preview pod. We said he was obviously signed for this reason to help Wout van Aert and shore up Jumbo-Visma's team in the classics. I got
yeah.
to admit, I didn't see this sort of performance coming. This was really, really strong to be the only team with multiple riders in the front group supporting Wout van Aert. It goes to show what a difference it made. We could have had a different race today where Wout van Aert's in a front group with Kung, Lampard, Stiebar, and Seneschal, and that would have been big problems. And that's what we've seen before. But today, completely the opposite. And Wout van Aert dominated this sprint. And Jumbo Visma, I'll say, just had the race played out perfectly. Apparently, Wout van Aert didn't go full on any of the Kemmelbergs because he didn't want to drop Van Hooydonk. He's got like that 30k flat run into the finish. You don't want to be closing down moves all on their own. Do you think the presence of Van Hooydonk even prevented too much happening in that last 30Ks?
I think it certainly boycotted the attacks a bit more than last year, because last year we had a situation very similar, but Turnison dropped
True,
from
yeah.
that front group in the last 30 kilometers, something like that. And that allowed for more attacks in the final section, with Van Hooydonk being here, knowing that he's a pretty good flat rider. He's got a time trial, so he can do this. He can counter stuff in these flat sections. And we might be underrating his history, because like he had a few off years, I'd say, but I think in 2017, I could be completely wrong, and it's so sad that I'm wrong about this, but when Oliver Naesen became Belgian champion, Nathan van Hooydonk was second in that race, and he did that also being the sole rider of BMC in that group, all over the cobble sections with the best cobble riders of Belgium that day. So yeah, certainly a rider that can ride cobbles, that's for sure. And I'm happy that he's again on a level that he's displaying stuff, because last year it wasn't really the case. And I'm just happy because he's also a fellow Pro Cycling Manager player, so highlighted. Yep.
Oh, really?
But next to that, yeah, just an awesome ride by the dude. And it all comes down to the initial echelon again. I think that it's easy to say that, oh, they had a better team today. Yeah, Jumbo, I think that they had a better team, or perhaps than last year, in the sense that one of their riders could stick in the last 30 kilometers, but they also had I can't call it luck, but perhaps the cleverness to be in the right position when that echelon happened. And when you have two people instead of one person in that echelon, it changed a lot, and that's displayed by Van Hooydonk here. It could just as well have been, for example, Trentin with Christophe, and then one of the two, well, they probably wouldn't work for each other, I think, but still.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get the gist of it.
We don't need to say Jumbo Visma's classics team strength problems are completely fixed. Really great day today, but we saw at Harelbeke the opposite of that, just a few days ago. So I know he had the puncture Wout van Aert, and that kind of stymied his race, but still, it was really good today. Really good to see, and a big win from Wout van Aert. Any other storylines, Benji? I mean, I'm going to title my video a Crosswind Chaos or something similar
You
tomorrow.
have to, like.
I have to, because the final really wasn't that interesting. And I think last year, I just remember having Seneschal, Pedersen, everyone attacking Van der Poel. Here's a hypothetical for you that we maybe might put on the LRCP Shorts YouTube channel once it exists. If Van der Poel was in this front group with Wout van Aert, how does that change the complexion of this final 25 kilometers?
It would depend on whether Van der Poel would be in it alone or would have a teammate, because if he is there alone, he tries to explode it even more on the last Kemmelberg, which makes sure that the group doesn't stick together. And then afterwards, you have the last 30 kilometers of flatness with smaller groups and more 1v1s. And I think a better situation for the rider like Kung to get away, because then you don't have Nathan van Hooijdonk anymore in that group. Then you won't be having Bennett, obviously, because if Van der Poel launches on the Camelback, I'd be surprised if there's more than 4 people left on that moment. Van Aert can't use the tactic of trying to keep it together, and it would be a completely different last 30 kilometers, certainly. But that all comes down to whether Van der Poel would have a teammate, because let's say if Van der Poel has Vermeers there, who was once again super strong today, then it could also play in differently, because then Van der Poel could try the same tactic as Van Hooijdonk and Van Aert did here. So it really depends on the situation, but I think that if Van der Poel would be in that front group, it would have been splintered way more after the Camelback, the last one.
We've had a few signings that were supposed to be Cobble Classic signings heralded this year. Ivan Garcia Cortina from Movistar. He was their best placed rider at 18th. So their cobbled form isn't really fixed. I mean, Irviti was in the early move. He was probably their best rider of the day. Same goes for Van Avermaet to Ashdazar Citroën. And I know once you miss the split, it's hard to have a good race from there, but it was similar issues at Harelbeke. Do you think they need to just go into these races, Benji, with Naesen and Van Avermaet, not having them as like a dual threat, but just be like, pick one, and the other one has to work for the other?
I think that the situation they were in today is difficult to judge, because it's all coming down to the initial echelon. If they were having attacks on the bergs, for example, that led to the attack, then it would be completely different. And then you can see who is a stronger one of the group and who can make that. I don't think today you can really say that.
No, you can't do that, because Van Avermaet will never say, I'll ride, even if he's not having a great day.
Exactly. But I was coming down to the point where obviously you need some kind of priority, but those riders also need to be honest about it in the race. And that's an issue if Van Avermaet doesn't want to say, oh, I'm not that great today, I'm going to ride for Naesen here. That's an issue. And that's the big difference I see between the likes of an Ashdazar and the likes of the Koenig today. Or like, most importantly at E3, where I think the Koenig, if one of their riders is not feeling too well, he just phones it in and he says, okay, we're going to try and make someone else of the team win, because it's not the individual rider that does it, it's a team. And I think that the Ashdazar team has the opposite opinion at the moment, in the sense that it feels like they are riding for themselves instead of the team.
I love how Astana Premier Tech straight up don't have a cobbled team. They had 3 riders finish, and the best place was 61st. And we said in the preview, like, they literally don't care about the cobbles and have no one to ride them. But Ardennes, pretty solid. Stage hunting, but pretty solid. Yeah.
When it comes to Ronde van Vlaanderen, they were planning to ride it with both Lutsenko and Fuglsang, but I read yesterday that the plans changed and they both won't be riding it. So again, no team there for them that day.
Really? Okay. Right. Yeah. They're focusing on the Ardennes. Anyway, Gent-Wevelgem finished today. That was our recap. We have Dwars door of Vlaanderen in a couple of days. Wednesday, I think, continuing the Cobble Classic action.